everybody. My name is Ruth Lyndon and I'm managing partner at specialist search firm Phoenix. It's hard to believe that 3 months ago, none of us had ever heard of coronavirus or COVID-19, but unfortunately, this is our new reality. There's no doubt that it's causing, issues across society as a whole, but equally for companies and employers, whether multinationals or SMEs, and regardless of sector. At Phoenix, we want to provide real value add to our clients where we can. Therefore, I am delighted to be hosting today's webinar and even more delighted to welcome our guest expert, Mary Seery Kearney. To give you a little bit of an overview, Mary is a practicing barrister who specialises in employment and privacy law. She is also a legal advisor to a number of different organisations and professional bodies, employers and special interest groups, as well as representing interests of individuals. Mary has a number of strings to her bow. She's also a director of the HR Brief Limited, which is provides professional management consultancy services to companies in HR, industrial relations, employment and privacy data compliance. And finally, Mary was elected as a public representative for Fine Gael in 2019 local elections. She serves as a member of South Dublin County Council, and she is currently a candidate in the Shannon elections by nomination of An Taoiseach. So very much expertly placed to join us this morning. The purpose of the webinar is basically to provide, and Mary's going to take us through the key employment and privacy implications arising during COVID-19 with a focus on employers. So I am delighted to open the floor over to Mary.
Good morning. All right. Thank you very much. I suppose that we'll go in and start on what topics I'm hoping to cover with you, and you interrupt me as often as you need to, Ruth, as questions arise. The first thing is, I suppose we're in very unusual circumstances, but particularly for businesses, that at this moment in time, companies are either obliged to shut down altogether because they are not an essential service, they are non-essential service. So we see that in retail and we see that in the hospitality in particular. But if you are an essential service, I'm going to begin by going through a little bit about that, and then how to avail of the government supports, because there are supports there for companies, but again, they have limitations, and to make sure that the companies put their best foot forward with the revenue commissioners in arguing in their case as to why they should benefit, and then the other ancillary supports that are going on at the moment. And then we'll quickly look at a little bit of the working from home considerations that employers need to consider, employment rights that have to be thought about at the moment. We'll touch briefly on employment permits, and there's one cautionary group in there that we just need to highlight for people. And then lastly, dealing with a little bit of health and safety.
Fantastic.
Okay, so beginning, I suppose, with essential services, what I've listed out there are the 16 groups of industries where there is an essential service, and therefore you are entitled to stay in business and stay open. And that may mean that your employees need to travel to work if you're perhaps, obviously, if you're making gowns for the PPE or anything like that, then people have to go to a physical sewing machine in a warehouse or in wherever. So there is a requirement for employees to travel. With all of these areas, there has to be a nexus between the activity that is being carried out and the current emergency circumstances. So, for instance, I can be an accountancy practice, but my employees are not entitled to travel into work if I have nothing to do with the health service, or my clients have nothing to do with currently having to stay, to stay open to provide services for perhaps in some sort of administration or in construction or in the creation or the manufacture of PPE equipment. So there has to be this nexus between what am I doing? Is it related to the current emergency? If not, the idea is that element of the economy is being put, into abeyance at the moment, or put to sleep at the moment, to be reactivated, hopefully, in a very short time. So make sure that you have that nexus. In the event that you do, and you can justify, and I have come across everything from companies that manufacture component parts for antennas that is part of the national broadband. So it is argued that they're part of critical infrastructure, particularly at the moment when there's a great reliance on broadband and bandwidth at home, to supplying staff into the hospitals and into the healthcare sector, and part of that recruitment. So there is quite a broad church of who can still remain operational. If your staff need to travel, they need to have their job description on them to justify what they do, the authorization letter from your company on your company headed paper, and they need to be able to produce personal identification so that they can prove they are the person who is in the letter. The letter can be on an email, it can be on a phone, so it doesn't have to be a physical letter that your employees have. In fact, it's probably better that there's nothing as little as possible transmitting between people. So emails are ideal, but that you have to have that email on their phone and a form of ID that would be acceptable in bank, that would be acceptable. So driver's license, passport, something that has your photograph on it.
Super. And Mary, just assuming you are, say, the accountancy practice and, two of your main clients are now manufacturing PPE equipment, presumably, though, because you can arguably do your job from home, you are working from home.
Yes, you are working from home. So you're working from home where possible. Yeah. But for those companies that there is a requirement to actually go in, because you have to be physically on site in those instances where employees are traveling, they have to have proof, because the Gardaí are out and naturally they're keen to keep as many people at home as possible and to stop the spread of this thing. And so they will ask, and they will inquire, and we have family members who we've dropped food to and that, because we've somebody in our family with cancer at the moment, and you're stopped and you're quite interrogated by the Gardaí, and rightly so. That's for all safety. Okay. All right, so just make sure that they have the I suppose the information on them to prove, I am Mary Seery, I work for the HR brief, and this is what I do for them. Because even within one organization, you may have a tier of staff who can work from home, and a group of staff who are obliged to go on the premises because they have to physically interact with something or other that is an essential service and part of the essential service. All right. Okay. So I suppose you don't have, maybe just one on that slide there. You don't have to have official authorization. So there's nowhere, you don't have to go to the Minister, Heather Humphreys, or get something from the department. There's no requirement for anything like that. Showing the company name, a company headed paper, that this is Mary and she works for this company, and the job description, and then the identification that the person can prove that they are the person named in the email. That is sufficient. Okay.
Great.
All right. So the next thing, I suppose, is we move on to availing of all of the government supports that are out there at the moment. Okay. At the very beginning, back on the 13th or the 12th of February or the 12th of March, when this was first announced, immediately a number of supports came into play. And that was that VAT and PAYE, they still wanted everyone to pay it online, but they suspended the idea of late interest payments. So late payments, there will be no interest or penalties on. That has been suspended. Now that's assuming that nobody, takes that to its extreme or takes advantage of it. I have a visitor here, so apologies. Thank you very much. Apologies.
PA, I'm very jealous. Very jealous.
Well, my. Thank you. Go away. Thank you. I'm really sorry.
The reality of being a working mum, it's probably going to happen to me in the next hour, but anyway.
Okay. So anyway, for VAT and PAYE, where you can pay it online, I suppose I would say to companies, don't use this as a cash flow stream if you can at all. If you don't have to rely on it, it is better not to engage revenue in any way, shape or form that has you on the back foot. But if there is approvable, but they may, before they apply interest, it's not a blanket bar on we're not going to do interest full stop. It may well be that they'll look for proof. So if you've got 100 grand sitting in a bank account somewhere, they will apply the interest and penalties. We can't assume that that's it. There's an amnesty. There isn't an amnesty. You've got to again, it comes down to a nexus of, I need this because I paid my staff, or I paid whatever, or I had to, you know, a lot of suppliers at the moment are looking for money on front and they're not giving credit, and perhaps understandably so. But
Yeah.
so it may well be to be ready to keep the documentary evidence as to why you relied on this from a cash flow point of view, if that's what you're doing.
Okay.
Okay. The next thing is they were undergoing a review of the relevant contracts tax. That is where the employers, especially in construction industry, would withhold a particular amount towards taxation. That has been reviewed and that's on hold. So whatever arrangements, if this applies to any business, whatever arrangements were in place before this, they have to be there, keep them in place. Customs for anybody that's moving pharmaceutical products or medicines or the component parts thereof, they are getting the green channel through customs, and they have been since the 12th of March.
Okay.
Rates is an interesting one for retail, hospitality. You know, the two biggest sectors that have been hit and are literally unable to open. When they contact their local authority, the local authority is telling them that they get their rate payment can be deferred for 3 months. So I know from my own constituents contacting me highly irate to say, I have 2 shops, I can't open either of them, and the council are telling me that I just don't have to pay March, April and May until July, August and September, or pay April, May, June until July, August and September. Yeah. So in the 3 months when we're opening and we're back up and it's summer holidays and perhaps people are, you know, going to travel down the country or abroad, in those months I now have double payments. So that option is open to defer. In the interim, I know and have been involved in a significant amount of lobbying of government to say the rates is the main form of income to a local authority. So if for local authorities to give some sort of an amnesty against the rates for a period of time, particularly maybe the 6-month period of time, they would have to have a guarantee from central government that they were going to be refunded the money or they were going to be supported from central government. That's a little bit more complex than just saying it. The Department of Finance can't just say we're going to do this, because it engages EU competition law, you know, state aid law. There's a whole heap of things that it laws. So the belief is, but this is not a fact and it's not legal advice and it's not any of this, but the belief is that by deferring it, we're buying time to find out and figure out those legalities. Okay. Because movements have to be afoot at EU level. And I know that they waived, I mean, we've put in 200 million of supports and the EU have waived that as being a state aid intervention, even though very clearly in normal times it would be. So it's going to take time for the legal ramifications of that to be figured out and overcome. It is believed that there may well be a 6-month amnesty for businesses who qualify. So the criteria isn't in any way established. So what I would say is, if you're in difficulty, get onto your local authority, get the benefit of the deferment anyway. Don't let the fact that it has to be deferred put you off applying for it. And in the interim, something else may arise.
Yeah. Okay.
If you don't have it, you can't pay it. And there is also the thing that if you're not open, if a premises is empty, they're not liable for rates when it is an empty premises anyway. So there is a little bit of manoeuvring in the law as it currently stands, but there may well be manoeuvring by the time this comes to be paid. It may well be that you would qualify for an amnesty in it if an amnesty is introduced for businesses that qualify. And then all important again, make sure you've documentary evidence of why were you closed? Why do you believe you qualify for this rates amnesty if there is an amnesty of sorts? Okay. All right. And before we go into the specifics of the latest government scheme, I suppose I would say when you have cash flow difficulties at all, engage with revenue. Revenue are allegedly at the moment are moving to a place where they are all fluffy and cuddly and there to support you and keep you in business, and that would be fantastic, and hopefully that's the case. But engage with them. Because if you have sent in the email that has set out your case, what you're doing is you're building evidence to prove you were proactive, you did the best you could. So if there are any consequences that revenue bring in later on down the road, there is talk that staff members that get the 410 a week at a subvention from government at present, and that there will be talk of taxing that later down the road. But so make sure that you're building a mass of evidence now to prove this is how our income reduced. These are the steps we take, and document your thinking as to why you took the steps you take, because afterwards, so you have contemporaneous notes. We lawyers love contemporaneous notes, but you have contemporaneous notes of why you made the just choices you did.
Okay.
And if you have that, then you may later rely on that as a justification for the choices that you took. And that leads to lenience, that you're not seen to be somebody who's merely taking advantage, because there will be the unscrupulous out there that are attempting to take advantage of the current circumstance. So at least you'll demonstrate that you're not doing that.
Perfect. And just in terms of engaging with revenue, Mary, in your experience and your client's experience, what's the best way to do that? Is it email? Is it phone call?
Email through the raw system, because you're already established there. Then that brings up your history as well for whoever's trying to answer a query. So they will take everything. They're promising that they are taking everything on a case-by-case basis. And to be fair, I have heard of them being very, very good, very supportive, and very helpful.
Great.
Also them being their normal selves, which is to be black and white. So it depends, I suppose, on what history and engagement there is. But it is better to be upfront in contact rather than make any assumptions.
Okay.
Don't act on the basis of any assumption, but get upfront, and then you have the proof that you put in the inquiry, you got that answer, this is what you made of the answer, and you've documented that.
Super.
Okay, great. All right. So I suppose when it comes to the latest round that came in on the 26th of March, this was a 12-week support system for employers, because there is a determination by government to try and maintain the employer-employee relationship where possible. So they have taken moves to support that, to keep that. A lot of our economy is based on jobs that are in the less than 38,000 per annum salary, and they're easier to shed, but they're also easier to re-employ. Which is what gets us back to work more quickly, and has done over the last few years. The problem is they're the easiest people to lay off, and you have people on shorter term, so redundancy is less, and it's easier to make those decisions to let those people go. The impetus from government is to try and keep those employer and employee engaged, so that when the end of this comes, that business can start very quickly, and we can get back to a functioning economy very, very quickly. So the first thing is the criteria. It is a self-assessment. You declare yourself to be within the criteria. There isn't now. They will look for documentary evidence at some stage in the process, but right now it is a self-declaration. Okay. In it, your economic disruption has to be related to the COVID-19. So if you were in a bad place financially, and your company was in a bad place prior to the 12th of March, or prior at the end of February, then it may be exacerbated by the COVID-19, but that would be a pre-existing condition, if we were to speak in medical terms. Right now, you need to show that there is a direct connection between the COVID-19 emergency health situation and the decline in your business.
Okay.
All right. So obviously, if I'm a coffee shop here in Temple Oak Village, then I can't open to the public anymore. I can't do that. That's a very clear. One day I was open, the next day I was closed.
Yeah. Okay.
So some will be self-evident by the nature of the business. Others will have to demonstrate why did COVID-19 stop or to bring about a decline in your business, and the decline has to hit 25%. 10% is no use, 20% is no use. It has to be a 25% reduction. That's the threshold. Once you're hit 25 or over or greater, and a lot of businesses, let's face it, are hitting more than 25% in decline in business. And once you hit that, then you're within the criteria.
Okay. And just on that, Mary, what's the calculation reference period, if you like? Is it, February versus March 2020? Is it Q1 2020 versus Q1 2019?
It's two things. It's three things, because the first one is it's whatever is relevant, whatever clearly demonstrates a comparison. So reasonable comparators. It may well be that is February, March. There's a very distinct change there, your business, because that will be suitable for the nature of your business. But it may well be that you were a seasonal business that closed down for January, February, or were, only coming out of the Christmas period, and maybe you're, in relation to food produce or something like that, that it's seasonal. And so it only starts picking up again in March. Then you're looking at Q2 of 2019 versus Q2 2020.
Okay.
So it's a movable feast. It's about whatever is relevant to your business. Be ready to argue why these two comparisons are relevant to your business as opposed to any other business. That what makes this criteria of comparison absolutely spot on for your 25%. But in a lot of cases, that will be obvious from the type of business that it is.
Okay, super.
Some of the hospitality around the country would have far lesser staff in the winter, and then come the 1st of March, they re-engage their staff. Those staff now can't be re-engaged.
Yeah.
So there are things like that are, it'll be very obvious. So they're dealing with Q2 of last year versus Q2 of this year.
Okay, great.
Okay. The criteria for employees, or for looking, I suppose, who do you pay and how do you pay them, is that it is who was on your payroll on the 29th of February. So before all this kicked off, when we were all laughing about beginning to maybe touch elbows when we met, back then, before all of that, who was on your payroll on that day? So on the 29th of February is the reference date. Who was on your payroll on that date? Because it may well be that come the 12th of March, people were laid off. So it's all right to bring back in the people that were laid off. So whoever was in that payroll that went in on the 29th of February, that was maybe for the whole month of February or for the week ending the 29th of February, whoever was an eligible employee is an eligible employee now if they were on the payroll that date.
Understood.
Okay. If they were laid off, or if they were on a winter or out of contract for the winter, then they need to continue seeking the unemployment benefit.
Okay.
They don't benefit, but it is who is actually on your payroll then.
Okay.
Okay. And the names of participating employers will be published. That isn't an insolvency register. It's for the benefit of employees to know that their employer is for a transparency purpose. So it's not the insolvency lawyers and accountants and we're jumping up and down at the beginning of this. Oh, you're published as insolvent. That is not what this register is. It's just a list of participating employers so that employees can check out whether their employer is participating in this and make suitable inquiries. So it's for transparency purposes rather than anything else.
Okay. And just on that, Mary, quite a practical point, would you recommend, if a company is going to avail of this, and from what I've even heard in the press, there's a lot of big name companies like the Brown Thomas and the Arnott's who have said we will be availing of it. So I think you're going to see all shapes and sizes on this list. Absolutely. But if you are a company who is availing of it, would you recommend that you tell your employees, engage with them, be transparent, and whether you're going to top up or not, which will come in a moment? Okay.
Absolutely. There is no reason not to be, because everyone knows there's an emergency going on. If an employee can benefit from getting the 410 each week, if they can benefit that, why not tell them? Because then everybody is in the same place and everyone will work together for the benefit of it.
Yeah, agreed.
Unions aren't coming out particularly against it. There's no traction against this. They're giving out about the fact that if I only work 3 hours a week, I get the same benefit as someone who worked, 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week. So the fact that it's a flat rate is maybe getting some are disgruntled, but there's a very small amount of people that applies to. And really, I would say be transparent. There's no reason not to be. Okay. So what is it? It has a ceiling. So the terminology that Revenue are using is average weekly net pay, AWN. So you see it, they love these acronyms, AWN all over the place. If your average weekly net pay was less than 586 euros a week, then you will get 410 euros per week, because that's supposed to be the 70%. And if it is a higher salary, so if it's over 586 but less than 960, they will get 350 a week. And any salary that is in excess of 960 will receive no subsidy whatsoever. So there is no base or flat rate that everybody gets. And it is the I suppose the lowest income group get the highest amount, the highest intervention or the subvention. The next income group get a lesser amount, and then once you're over 960 per week, then you don't get anything at all. Now that has raised eyebrows.
Yeah.
And that is seen to be very unfair, because the people in that category would tend to be the higher paid. They probably have mortgages, they have, and all of the representation and lobbying has gone in on behalf of that to say, what about these higher category? The answer thus far has been there has to be a threshold. The supports are going for the lower income groups. The people in higher income groups are expected to have savings. They're expected to, be able to put a stop on their mortgage for a couple of weeks, or to whatever, or to maybe have resources elsewise. So it is unfair. There is an unfairness built into that. Yeah. But the idea is that if you were to split all of the employees in the economy, the vast majority will come under this lower wage group.
Yeah, understood. And are there any moves for government to review that? Do you think that might change?
No.
Okay.
And I listened to an interview with Pascal Donoghue the other day, and he was quite, look, there has to be an upper threshold, and that's it.
Yeah.
And certainly any information that's coming to me wearing my counsellor hat is not suggesting any change to that.
Okay. So as an employer, your options are pay them as usual, lay off, short-term redundancy.
Yes. Or discuss with them about reduced hours and reduced pay.
Yeah. Okay.
So the short time working, that would be where that would be engaged. Okay. The next thing that maybe is causing a little bit of confusion is there is no obligation to top up whatsoever, none. But employers are expected to make a reasonable attempt. If you don't have, resources sitting there and money sitting there, well then, you're not expected to top up. If you have vast resources, then there will be a review of that at some point. At some point, revenue is going to come back to all these companies one by one and say, did you avail of money from the state when you had billions in a bank? So the bigger multinationals, all of that, they'll have a case to answer if they are availing of it, for those that may be. But if for the purposes of running your payroll, because you still have to run your payroll to make sure that PRSI stamps are being paid for your staff, you need to do it at 1 cent, and that's the revenue recommendation. Because, pardon me, you can't run a payroll on 0, so you can't on 1 cent, and then you're processing the payment from revenue that's going to be put into the bank account. It takes about 2 days once it's all been processed through, and so you have to put in the 1 cent just to actually get the payroll to function.
Okay, so employer pays, and hopefully 2 days later you get it back. Employer gets it back from revenue.
It is. In some instances, it's instantaneous, and no one is in a shortfall at all. But so it works. It works out very efficiently. I haven't heard any major complaints about the running of the system in the last week or so. Anyway,
right.
Okay, it'll run for a 12-week period. The hope is that by the time we hit the 30th of June, we're well on the other side of this. And it'll have a chance where we can open in a phased basis, and business is slowly coming back to normal.
Yeah.
So the hope is that by the end of May, we're coming through. We're showing falls in the number of cases on a daily basis, and that then June we're slowly opening and life is slowly returning to normal, and hopefully the 1st of July. We'll all be out in our bikinis in the back garden, working from home. Okay, so anything else on that?
No, I think that kind of covers it off the main, and I know that is of particular interest to a number of companies. So I think we've hit the main points, which is great.
Great. So just a couple of last, I suppose, logistics of it. the revenue will reimburse within 2 working days. Once you submit your payroll to them, they send the money back to you. Income tax and USC is not applied to the subsidy payment. There is talk that they're going to come back afterwards at some point. How that's going to happen and the logistics of that is beyond me.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll see. I suppose it depends on retrospectively, and they leave the door open in case there is abuse of the system. That's why they do that.
Yeah.
Then there is no PRSI for the employee to be. So the employee is not taxed PRSI on the top up if a top up is being paid.
Okay.
And employers, if they're topping up, they don't pay their usual, I think it's 10.5% or 12.5% PRSI. They don't pay that. They only pay 0.5% PRSI. So that is to ensure a continuity of stamps, but on the top up payment. All right. Okay. And if someone is getting the pandemic unemployment benefit, so if they've been laid off and they were getting that unemployment benefit, they cannot get that unemployment benefit and come back into the scheme. So you're either one or the other. You can't be both.
And how would employers know if an employee was trying to?
Because they probably would have filled in a form for them.
Okay. Understood. Yeah.
And they probably would. They'd have had to confirm that they were laid off and on social welfare.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, so they would know that. So I suppose there is an equivalence between the unemployment payment, the amount, the pandemic payment, and if an employee is on the higher rate, that middle rate, or the higher rate, the 350, there is an equivalence then. So there is a slight disincentive not to return to work. However, if your employer has work available and you aren't coming to it, then you cease to be eligible for unemployment payments.
Okay, understood. Yeah, if it's there and they just won't come in, then okay, understood.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know there are employers that have sent out emphatic emails to their employees saying, we have work for you. We need to keep continuity of the business and you need to come in. We're availing of the system, but we're availing of the scheme, but you need to be able to come into work. And if we're contacted by revenue, we can't continue to sign forms when there is work available.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah. Okay. So that covers all of those. Then the last we've dealt with that slide deals with the turnover, but you've ably questioned me on that already.
Wouldn't be like me, Mary. Wouldn't be like
ahead of ourselves here. Okay, so I think that covers it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Anything else? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I suppose is that we come into a working from home. And maybe for employers to think about this, we were in a panic to get people home, get computers. At one point we were trying to advise on, well, what happens if I have only 4 laptops and I have 6 staff? How am I going to work? Well, then the 2 staff could come in and work socially distanced that don't have laptops, and the other 4 could stay at home. So there was a time when we were juggling that. Now everyone as possible is working from home, but there are a couple of things to bear in mind with that, that are really important. And the first of all is, what level of work are you giving to your employees while they're working from home? Are you considering, as I've experienced it here myself, that there are children, there are interruptions, there aren't the same level of child support, or, my husband and I are doing, rotating hours of I'm on duty, you're on duty. Peppa Pig is on duty. I confess, I hold my hands up at times. So there are very challenging situations in different people's homes. So the employers need to consider that and consider it's not reasonable for me to expect that Mary is going to be sitting at her desk from 9 until 5. And be 100% available. But that's a dialogue, and have that, I suppose that's caring for, that's checking in, not checking up. And then the productivity, KPIs, all of those need to be adjusted accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a reality of what is the situation, so that you're looking at, you become completely outcome oriented rather than process and outcome.
Yeah.
And that, the process, it doesn't matter. There are times, and probably the signs are on it in my face, but there are times that people are getting emails from me at 5:30 in the morning because it suits me to get up very early, discharge all my emails, and then I'm around for breakfast. I was around for teaching. Thank God the schools are on holidays at the moment, but you were around for doing all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the means in which it happens is going to be different, but that employers show latitude on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, that does mean also that you will still need to connect employees. People need to be diaried in. If there are going to be meetings, Zoom meetings, or whichever meets or Teams, whichever method you bring people together, have an agenda in advance. Have it a timed agenda. So that people know I'm committed, I'm here for a 40-minute or an hour meeting, and then it's reasonable to get the sports in the house for that period.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it you could be wandering around in whatever, and it can be done sitting in the shed or hiding in the room, as sometimes they are. So it's just to consider that. Consider that if people are coming from a big open plan office where people are coming and going all the time, and now suddenly they're isolated at home without that, I suppose, just that company, even the company of other people, give some consideration to that. No harm for once a week to do a group company coffee break. Every spring, let's see what buns you cook and you bake in the house. To do something that brings people together and deals with the change in culture all of a sudden. For nerdy people like me, I'd love to be sitting in a corner at the moment doing a thesis and left on my own. That's the isolation suits me. But for others, it's a massive cultural change. So consider that.
No, it is. And I think tied to motivation, which you mentioned as well, and certainly like from a Phoenix perspective, we've regular Google Hangouts. There is that visual piece is important. We're kind of taking this opportunity to look at the L&D program, maybe kind of, so watching things together, discussing things together. And it is as much about that. It's the social interaction piece because, this is new. I worked from home before, but for a lot of people, this is new. So I completely agree.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it does. I mean, that's a great idea. Keeping them motivated, keeping people engaged. You're interested in them. You're interested in their lives, their challenges. You're also interested in getting your business done and keeping that continuity and that connection and people's skills, sharp still, that's very important. Things that have been used by companies are WhatsApp groups, Viber, all of those. But let's take the WhatsApp group. The WhatsApp group is fantastic for people to be connected and to whatever. The one thing that it can lend itself to is inappropriate sharing of jokes. To be mindful of things like that. Somebody needs to be moderating this. I'm in a half a dozen groups at the moment. I can open it. I have a lot of them muted, and I can open it up, and there can be 70 messages there. It's impossible to keep to that. It's impossible to read all those. Within that, there may be someone who thought it was a great idea to put up some sort of a thing that is either has racist overtones or sexist overtones. So it is important for employers, if you set up a WhatsApp group to keep people engaged, make sure that you've circulated rules of engagement, of what is not tolerated, because you are still responsible as employers under employment equality legislation to make sure there's no discrimination, there's nothing that can cause offence. You're still bound by how people engage with each other. We are all at a heightened level of stress and anxiety as a country, we are right now. But in that, it is important that doesn't mean that it's okay for me to have a go at Ruth and Ruth to have a go back at me, for us to be anything other than our normal professional selves and professional relationship. And the employer is deemed responsible because you bring people together and they know each other through your employment only, as the initial source of contact. Because of that, you are responsible if bullying or harassment or anything arises out of that. So just be careful how people are commenting to each other. Well, sure, of course, we always knew you'd, be a great baker, or you'd be a great whatever. It is important people don't drop their standards because they're out of the professional environment of going into the workplace. That workplace persona may slip. It's important that everyone is reminded to make sure that they keep that reiterated.
Yeah, no, really, really relevant. And, WhatsApp traffic is increasing in all of these groups, obviously. So that's really, important that employers are aware of that.
Yes. So policy compliance, the other big thing of policy compliance is Organisation of Working Time Act. People still need to take breaks. So make sure that as employers, it's really important that we communicate that out. you have no way of checking that anymore. You know,
Yeah.
you're not going to get them to be signing timesheets at
No.
home. If you think you get away with that, then go for it, with my blessing. But that probably isn't going to happen. However, you need to have formally said, if you are working, make sure that you're taking your break, make sure that you're taking a lunch break. You're sitting at a desk that probably isn't ergonomically, you know I'm sitting at it's a fairly functional IKEA desk, but it is not what I would have had in my official office.
Yeah.
And I haven't bothered. I've gone for what's comfy and what I like, because I'm at home. And their considerations, if you're obliging people to have, if they're accountants, if they're in a job that's heavily intensive on a screen all day every day, and several hours of work together, it is really important that you have sent out the advice: get up, walk around, get fresh air, make sure you take your breaks.
Yeah.
For the fact that you need to stretch, you need to whatever, so you don't become liable because of workload for any unintended consequences, such as repetitive strain injuries, all of these things, because a day will come at the end of COVID-19, and things will restore and things will get back to normal, and solicitors and personal injuries people will get back to normal, and all of that will all happen again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I suppose make sure you have in documentary evidence in email now for that time to say, well, I did say to you to take breaks.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
promise you didn't,
Okay.
and not. So consider that. And then the last two maybe big things in this is to look at data privacy. If you're working from home and your work involves the data management of other staff, your fellow employees, or clients, or whomever, customers and patients, whoever, whatever way that personal data comes to your business, you are still required to maintain that on GDPR standards, and to be very careful. Make sure that if you have a management system, a CRM or a records management system, if you have that people have to log on to it, and that they log off, that they're not leaving it open while on the big screen, in their computer, with everybody that in their house having a look at it and going, oh geez, is that how much your woman is paid, or whatever. Just be
Yeah.
sensitive to that. Make sure the screensavers click off within 10 seconds of non-use. All of the things that just keep private. You need to be privacy in your practice, privacy by design, and make sure that you send out you remind people of your data protection policy, of your privacy notice. The same things, don't be pulling information out of a CRM system onto a home desktop on a computer. Remind employees of all of those things. That's really important right now.
Okay.
And lastly, insurance. If your equipment, if your company equipment is now in the home of your employees, is it insured? What happens? We have people being let out of prison at the moment for all the right reasons, but I know from sitting on the joint policing board that once certain individuals come out of prison, the rate of burglaries go up.
Okay.
So be mindful. Is your equipment covered? Are you covered for GDPR breaches? So you need to have an engagement with your own insurance company to see, does my cover extend to this? And your employees need to be having an engagement with their insurance company, that if the house is broken into, is the stuff from my business, is all of my equipment for my business, is that covered?
Yeah.
So it's just prudent to have that conversation now.
And that concludes part one of our two-part webinar series. Mary will join me again for part two, where we will look at a number of relevant issues, including short-term layoff and redundancy, relevant selection criteria, contract notice periods, and the ability to amend employee contracts. Mary will also take us through employment permits, and finally we will take a look at some of the health and safety requirements, particularly for those companies who are operational. Many thanks. I hope you enjoyed this. Please do join us for part two, available this Friday on Phoenix's website and across all our usual social media platforms. Many thanks and stay safe.